narrative of the campaign, bears vivid witness to what it was like on that terrible field. In answering the questions posed by Carman and Gould, the veterans repeatedly stressed that no matter how many other battles they endured during the war, there was nothing quite like that bloody 17th of September. As one Southerner put it, after the passage of time, it might seem almost impossible to remember with any degree of accuracy circumstances that took place then. But these things are indelibly impressed upon my memory. In these recollections is abundant evidence that the struggle along Antietam Creek was the most bitter and savage of the Civil War. Prologue. The Last Best Hope. Charles Francis Adams, Jr., first lieutenant in the 1st Massachusetts Cavalry, grandson and great-grandson of presidents, was in Washington to take the national pulse. He was shaken by what he found. At a writing table in one of the parlors in Willard's Hotel, he set down his impressions for his father, the American minister to the court of St. James's in London. "I think I can give you a little more light than you now have," young Adams wrote under the date August 27, 1862. "Do you know that in the opinion of our leading military men, Washington is in more danger than it ever yet has been? Do you know that but for McDowell's jealousy, we should have triumphantly marched into Richmond? Do you know that Pope is a humbug and known to be so by those who put him in his present place? Do you know that today he is so completely out-generaled as to be cut off from Washington?" The Union cause was in deep crisis, he continued. "Our rulers seem to me to be crazy. The air of this city seems thick with treachery. Our army seems in danger of utter demoralization. Everything is ripe for a terrible panic, the end of which I cannot see or even imagine." He had looked in vain for a silver lining. "It is my glimpse behind the scenes, the conviction that small men with selfish motives control the war without any central power to keep them in bounds, which terrifies and discourages me." A lesser mortal might have been content simply to record that day's gloomy mood at Willard's, the central listening post for all rumor and gossip in the capital. And Adams had better connections. His glimpse behind the scenes was furnished by Colonel J.C. Kelton, a staff officer at the 3-story brick building on 17th Street near the White House that housed the War Department. The situation, as Colonel Kelton described it, was enough to discourage even an eternal optimist. Viewed from the War Department, the military picture in these last days of August 1862 was badly obscured and thus highly unsettling. At last report, the Army of Virginia under John Pope and his second-in-command, Irvin McDowell, the generals regarded with such disdain by Lieutenant Adams, was being stalked by a shadowy force of armed Confederates in the Virginia countryside just 25 or 30 miles to the west. No one in Pope's army or in the capital seemed able to say where these rebels were, or in what strength, or what they intended. The one certainty was that things were going very wrong. Only 2 months earlier, Richmond had been under siege and apparently doomed, and with it the Confederacy. Now menace crowded Washington's doorstep, prompting talk of treachery and malfeasance in the high command. The abrupt reversal had begun late in June with the checkmating of General George B. McClellan's Army of the Potomac on the Virginia Peninsula southeast of Richmond. On August 3rd, McClellan was ordered to give up his balked campaign and return to Washington to combine forces with General Pope's newly formed Army of Virginia. McClellan accepted the order with bad grace, and the evacuation was taking time, too much time in the opinion of the War Department. For a good part of August, most of the Army of the Potomac was off the military chessboard, its troops on the march to embarkation points or aboard transports in Chesapeake Bay and the lower Potomac. Meanwhile, John Pope reported sudden and alarming pressure from the enemy. "His whole force, as far as can be ascertained, is massed in front of me," he signaled on August 25th. He called for reinforcements, for supplies, for guidance. Then, on August 26th, the telegraph linking his army with Washington went dead. Within hours, the line from Manassas Junction on the Orange and Alexandria Railroad, well to the rear of the Army of Virginia and the site of its main supply base, also went dead. The last news from the Manassas telegrapher was ominous. "Number 6 train, engine secretary, was fired into at Bristow by a party of Secesh cavalry, some say 500 strong." The clear and sunny weather on Wednesday, August 27th, brought no more cheer to official Washington than it did to Lieutenant Adams. News was fragmentary and uniformly bad. Civilian refugees reaching Alexandria, half a dozen miles down the Potomac from the capital, carried tales of the huge supply depot at Manassas Junction looted and in flames, and rebels everywhere. Colonel Herman Haupt, the energetic supervisor of military railroads, had messages from his telegraphers at other stations along the Orange and Alexandria, confirming that the enemy was indeed astride the Army of Virginia's supply line, and with more than just cavalry. General Pope remained cut off from communication with Washington. However, one of the Army of the Potomac units already in the field, Fitz-John Porter's 5th Corps, retained a telegraphic link with General Ambrose Burnside at Falmouth to the south. Porter, waxing sarcastic on Pope's generalship, warned of an imminent battle. He added a personal plea to his friend Burnside. "I wish myself away from it, with all our old Army of the Potomac, and so do our companions. If you can get me away, please do so. Make what use of this you choose, so it does good." Burnside forwarded Porter's dispatch to General-in-Chief Henry W. Halleck at the War Department. General Halleck was a man sorely tried. Porter's commentary was fresh evidence that his task of melding McClellan's Army of the Potomac with Pope's Army of Virginia was a case of mixing oil with water. Part of the trouble was Pope's ill repute among the Potomac Army's officer corps. His handling of troops, McClellan angrily wrote his wife, was "infamous conduct, and he deserves hanging for it." Porter made no secret of his contempt, calling Pope an ass. General Samuel D. Sturgis, who had served with Pope in the Western Theater earlier in the war, expressed his opinion more picturesquely. A few days before, Sturgis had tied up Colonel Haupt's railroad by commandeering troop trains for his men at Alexandria. When Haupt stormed into Sturgis's headquarters, he found the general fortified with drink and unrepentant. It would take 24 hours to untangle the mess, Haupt complained, and leave Pope out on a limb, a prospect that moved Sturgis to intone, "I don't care for John Pope a pinch of owl dung." Only by threatening him with arrest on Halleck's authority could Haupt get his railroad back. Yet the problem went far deeper than personal animosity. The greatest of Halleck's trials was proving to be the character and conduct of General McClellan himself. McClellan and Halleck offered a study in contrasts. The head of the Army of the Potomac was the very image of the fighting general, stocky and martial in bearing, youthful and personable, with a commanding presence that made him greatly admired by his troops. With perfect sincerity, his supporters called him the young Napoleon. Halleck was called Old Brains, and seldom admiringly. A dumpy, paunchy figure with staring fish-like eyes, he was quite without presence. His natural habitat was an office desk rather than a battlefield. Yet in one respect, the two men were much alike. Both were versed in the rules of bureaucratic survival. Be ever cautious, deflect responsibility whenever possible, protect flanks and rear at all times from the hostile fire of critics. Early that Wednesday, when McClellan reported in from his new headquarters at Alexandria, they began the mutual practice of their art. Under McClellan's immediate command were 2 Army of the Potomac Corps, William B. Franklin's 6th and Edwin V. Sumner's 2nd, not yet in the field with Pope. Halleck wanted Franklin, already at Alexandria, to cover the 25 miles to Manassas Junction by forced marches to reinforce Pope. McClellan assured the General-in-Chief that the necessary orders would go out at once. "I have no time for details," Halleck wired, explaining that he was busy with recruiting matters in the Western Theater. "As ranking general in the field, direct as you deem best." As the day wore on, however, McClellan began urging a prudent second look at the situation. Franklin's corps was short of artillery horses and cavalry and supply wagons.